Alright, so what's next?
What's next? Yes, moving on to something actually relevant. Since we don't have Jordan, it probably wouldn't be fair to do the GPL talk again. We're gonna leave the tournaments off. We talked about the Verizon thing and PC versus Mac.
Yeah, we did.
We didn't talk about this in PC versus Mac, and I wish we had Jordan, but this isn't going to be relevant next week. Google's CEO, who's in charge at Google, has changed, and Google is in charge of a lot of open source projects. I'm not sure in the end this really means anything for the end user. I think all this stuff's going to stay open source. They say this came from, he wanted to stay in China, and the guy who's now in charge said, no, Scully, we're not going to censor the interweb just to keep the Chinese government happy. We're not going to do it. We're going to stop. We're just going to move on. We're not playing games anymore. We shouldn't have been playing this long. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that at the end of the day here, this is going to mean anything, or you think it's going to be business as usual and nothing's going to really change at Google other than it might become more profitable?
Yeah, I don't really see a big change. The CEO change. I mean, the guy who changed it was already, it changed from Eric Schmidt to who?
Okay, what's his name right now?
Larry Page.
Yeah, say it again.
Larry Page.
Yeah.
Which I had it at the top of my mind, but I didn't want to say it because I was afraid I would get.
Yeah, I didn't want to say the other one because there were two.
Yes.
That's like.
Sergey?
I didn't want to say the other Larry.
Yes.
But Larry Page is the co-founder of Google, right?
Right. That's effectively what it means. It's like Google is now under the regime of one of the kids that created it.
Right. I mean, it's not like the same thing as if Steve Jobs changed his CEO to somebody else.
No, actually, I know exactly what this would be like. This would be like if Wozniak actually had business sense, which he never really has. But this would be like if the replacement for Steve Jobs, heaven forbid something happened to him, was, okay, Wozniak's willing to take in. It's like...
Right. If Wozniak did have business sense and he controlled that already, people would be like, okay.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about this. I really don't think it's going to be that big of a change. As far as I know, they both have, they both have, similar views of what to do. So they're not going to all of a sudden start becoming evil. I'm pretty sure their motto's not going to change.
Now, one thing debate on there is everybody's wondering what's going to happen to Schmidt. One of the theories that's going around the Twitter scope and the interweb is that he's going to become a lobbyist on behalf of the almighty Google. I have mixed feelings about Google having their own private lobbyists. Not that they don't already, but do we really... like you said, you don't think they're going to become evil. That could become a very slippery slope. It really, something just happens to companies that send lobbyists to Washington. They don't mean to, but that's...
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know that's going to happen. That's just a theory. Because apparently...
I don't know enough about it. I don't know enough about how lobbyists really work to really comment too much on it, but...
Well, I can give you the cynical view of how a lobbyist works. I have money for you to agree with me. Where's your PAC?
I think that, the way I see Google going about their business, they almost place their business in such a way that even if they wanted to, they could not go back and make it evil or make it monopolistic, even if they wanted to, because of the ways, because of the parts of it they open source, the parts of it they give out, and the parts of it that they make transparent, that even if they wanted to, they don't really have a choice to become evil.
They would be hard-pressed. However, here's the problem with Google as a company. They are such a conglomerate. You know, it's like people say, oh, well, they're copying Apple creating their own show. Google created their own press show announcement thing because the reality is Google is a telecom company, a search engine company, a software company, a aggregation company, an advertising company, an email company, a video streaming company. They are all of these things and simultaneously none of these things. They are a conglomeration of all these different bits and bobs that just kind of spidered out into everything. And
there's many more that you could have said.
Yeah, I could have kept going on for at least 5 minutes naming things, but people's eyes might start to glaze over. But the reality is, because they're just like that octopus going out, it's very easy for an anti-lobbyist to go to some regulator or somebody in Washington, somebody who isn't technically savvy, and go, they're in this, and go for 5 minutes and name all these things. And the initial reaction a non-technical person would have to somebody doing that is, oh my God, we have to stop this company. They control everything. And as you just pointed out, not only do they not control it, but if they tried, the Googledom would fall apart. It would. Work, yeah. But you have to be a technical person to realize that the most really nefarious thing Google can do is accidentally capture your unencrypted Wi-Fi and do the same thing every other large corporation, including Apple, Microsoft, and every cell phone carrier, which is sell the information they have tethered to law enforcement, if law enforcement wants to buy it. Aside from that, which is not unique to them, they really can't be this evil, nefarious, even if they want to, like you said.
Which I feel that they set up it like that on purpose, because they know that a company that big has a huge pressure to do some things they have the power to do, and they know that it's better in the long run for them not to do those things, so they set it up so that it won't be so easy to do those things. At least that's what I feel they do, and if they do that, they're very smart.
I think that might have been the plan of some of their founders, because they, like we just pointed out, they didn't have absolute control of the company until just now, and it was one of those. I think, like you say, it was a strategic division in which it's like just to protect from in case we lose complete control here. It's like, let's plant a hidden bomb and everything, and that there's an open source core, and that if somebody tries to fuck with it, there'll be a fork and the whole of the Googledom will fall apart.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it's one of those things.
Works very well.
Yeah, it really the making it impossible to cage really is the best defense against that. Because even with the best of intentions, eventually that cage starts to turn into the year 1984, and we just have to protect you from free will. It's like, do we have anything else to say on that, or do we want to move on?
No, let's move on.
Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to the viruses and repos.
Yes.
Somebody here pointed out that GNU Linux users will mostly be safe from viruses because almost all of the software you will ever need is in the repo. I have two problems with that. A, to please 100% of the users, people are going to go out of the repo. No matter how perfect a repo is, it's not 100%, and it never will be. Two, as you pointed out, and which was the whole reason I put it in here, just because it's in the repo doesn't necessarily mean it's virus-free.
Right. There's no way that any company could check every line of code of every single project and understand that code enough to know that it doesn't do anything malicious. So, obviously, being in the repo does not mean that you cannot get a virus from it. Anything that, because a virus works just like, a normal program would, it just does things how you don't want. A bug can act like a virus, it deletes something when you don't want it to be deleted. It's impossible to know, and it just, what a repo does do is it protects against it, because it allows them to, that people report this as a virus, and then they could remove it from the repo very easily. They can't remove it,
Right.
from an outside force.
Now we should note that most viruses are worms. Tend now, but in the eyes of the end user, viruses, worms, trojans, and malware are really all the same thing. But they are different things. So if you count them all as one thing, it's not. But specifically, viruses that are actually viruses and viruses that are worms tend not to make it into the repo, because everything that makes it into the repo does go through a beta process by the developers of the OS. And if they start seeing virus or worm behavior on their beta testing box, they're not going to load it into the repos. So they're going to go, nope, I don't know where it came from, but no, something's wrong here. The things that tend to slip by are Trojans. In that it's a time bomb. It's set to go off at some later point, in which case it makes it through the beta process and it gets activated, and then it goes off. However, it's like you said, that's usually caught very fast due to the open source nature, and that there's some really technical people working and continuing to develop on Linux, even if they're not necessarily working on a project part. And occasionally when this does happen, it's like instantly there's a thread that goes off. There's people start going, wait a minute, why the hell is this doing this? Maybe I just don't understand, but this is odd behavior. I need to understand why it's doing it. And instantly it's torn apart by about 20 or 30 people very quickly.
And because it's not in some external repository or some external program, Canonical does have, the ability to, remove this from the repos, and, that's what the power of a repo is. It's more about removing software that's bad and having a review for software and having, known trusted software, which is another good thing about repo. You could go into software, if you're smart about what you download, and you download software that has reviews, which they're going to be adding, and has, good ratings, it's probably not going to have a virus,
No system's perfect, and it doesn't claim to be perfect.
But I mean, in all honesty, there is no possible way to protect against every single virus unless you only let everything come from one single company, or check every single line of code. And even then, there could be some rogue programmer that doesn't like his company that does that.
Yeah, so I hate to turn this into an Apple bash thing, but that's what Apple's trying to do, and they've failed 3 times. They haven't done anything oh dear goddess yet, but they have failed 3 times to spot things. It's I don't care how good you are. It's like, it's just, no system's perfect. It's not going to be. That's one of the things I love about Linux. Linux never claims to be perfect. It claims, this is what we are today. We hope to be better tomorrow. And honestly, this is one of the reasons I like PCLin, and that PCLin has two repos. They have a vetted repo, and they have a beta repo. And that this is the stuff that has been tested by the developers, but it has not yet run through the full peer review, this one's on, so it's a little riskier, it's not fully polished, and it could potentially have some of this stuff. You do so at your own risk. It's not enabled by default. You have to be a more technical user who understands the risks to go in and turn how to get those packs on. I like the multi-tier thing like that. It's the equivalent of an Android device of, well, I'd like to install from places other than the Google Store at my own risk.
I think that, and somewhat like what you said, I've had the idea, how Mint handles updates, have you seen it?
Not lately. So, go ahead and re-explain.
The Mint update has this cool thing. It lists updates by number, and they list it 1, which is this is a security update, and you absolutely need this. You need it to be installed. 2, this is a stable update. It won't crash your system. 3, this is a tested update. 4, this is questionable. You do not need this update, and it's something like a new kernel or something like that. And 5 is untested, only works with some systems, and has had bug reports about it. And so by default, they only install 1 through 3. They don't install the things that are questionable. And you can install them if you want, but I like that part about Mint, that they do say, you don't really need these updates, and they may have problems. You can install them if you want, but this is the level of security. And I wish they would do the same thing in the software center and have that with all the software. Like, this software is tested, this is a stable version, it has good reviews, and that gets this number. And then this is new software, this gets this number. I would like that.
My guess is that's probably coming. It's just not there. It's not there yet. It's going to be revetting all the software and so on. But yeah, it's like the multi-layer stuff. And like you said, and you brought up the kernel. That's one of the things, again, I love about Linux is that, unlike pretty much any other OS, you can completely upgrade to the latest and greatest kernel. Of course, there's some interdependency issues where you don't necessarily want to do that.
Which is why Mint doesn't by default upgrade.
I don't know a single distro that by default will just upgrade to the latest and greatest kernel. Even rolling distros like PC Lin, even when they're like, here's a new kernel, it doesn't just go, oh, we're going to throw out your old kernel that may have some dependencies for applications you're using and just upgrade to the new latest and greatest kernel. 9 times out of 10, unless you go in there and manually do it, it will not upgrade the kernel unless you do a reinstall from an ISO using a later kernel. And that's really the way that should be. For those of you who are not Linux users and have no clue what we're talking about, this would be like, well, actually, a better example would be to use OS X. This is like when you upgrade Tiger, it turning itself into Lion, whether you want it to or not. This should not happen. You should have to upgrade to Leopard, Snow Leopard, Lion, whatever you want. The same thing with Windows. You shouldn't just upgrade from XP to 7 without choosing to. You may want to, but it shouldn't just do it on its own. And I think that's the right approach.
Alright.
Hold on. Curtis. Damn it. Okay. There was one other comment here we should get into before we wrap up. In the last week, you weren't here, but one of the reasons we brought up for choosing Linux as a SOT is the stability that goes with the fact that by default, most Linux distros break the root, home, and swap file into separate partitions, which leads to a much stabler system and so on and so forth. Somebody made a comment in a thing that said, yeah, but most distros don't do this. I had forgotten about that, and that I have to go back and check now. You're using Mint. When you installed Mint, by default, because PC Lin, by default, this is the default if you don't do anything, you're just grandma, click the button and do it for me install, is a swap partition, a root partition, and a home partition. It's 3 separate partitions distinct. What does Mint do by default? Is it just 2 partitions where the root and home is sharing, and then the swap? But the swap's always going to be a different partition in Linux.
Well, actually, it does only 2. The root and home are on the same partition, and then there's the swap, which is how Ubuntu does it by default, and Mint does the same way. I did set it up myself to make it how you said, but
Okay.
yeah, it does the same as Ubuntu, which I don't like, but
I okay, so PC Lin's a little ahead of the curve in that. Okay, now I have to go back and check what Madriva's on. So, okay, apparently they are right. Most distros aren't doing that right now. Another thing to add to my Ubuntu check tally. Damn it, Ubuntu! Why don't you do this? It's like
I don't know about if Linux Mint Debian does this. They might actually set it up the right way, but the one based off Ubuntu doesn't. Anyway, but yeah, so if you do look at, you could say that most distros don't, even though it's not most distros, but most people who use Linux are going to be using either Ubuntu or Mint.
Unfortunately, that's no. I don't know why they don't do that, because it's so much more stable, and it the system's more optimized. I guess because technically you could potentially wind up with some wasted space, but it's not like hard drives are ridiculously small these days. If I wind up accidentally losing 3 gig to my root partition, I think I can live with that. It's like, I really do think I can live with that. Especially on a 2 terabyte hard drive, which has gotten ridiculously. Even if you have, and if you don't have a 2 terabyte hard drive and you only have like a 200 gigabyte hard drive, the reality is the average user is being hard pressed to use 150 gig. It's like 500 gig would suit the majority of the end user right now, and the little bit they'd lose is not enough.
It does not suit me.
Oh, I know. It doesn't suit users like us. I need more petabytes, thank you. More petabytes, please.
Yeah. But, I mean, that's a perfectly valid point. They really should set it up like that by default. There's so many advantages to it. But let's move on to what you just made bold.
Well, okay, I don't want to go into this one this week, because this is the one I'm hoping what's-his-name will come help with. Because he actually admins boxes on a daily basis. That's his job. So now, if he doesn't, we will talk about this next week. But I'm hoping he will. I haven't heard back from him yet, so I don't know. He's kind of a little busy right now. But if he has time, I'd rather do this discussion with him involved, because and we're not talking about Jordan. We're talking about somebody else. But that would be the person who would know this like the back of their hand, because they deal with it on a daily basis. This is one I would have liked to have Jordan with, but we'll bring it up, and if Jordan has anything he wants to say on it.
Especially since Jordan used to be a developer for Foresight.
Yeah, I like the idea. What we're talking about here is somebody asked, have we checked out Foresight's rollback feature? I like the idea. I'm just not sure how that can really work. What the idea behind that is like on a rolling distro, as I roll forward, it's not really possible to go, oh yeah, I'd like to stick the updating in reverse and kind of roll backwards. It doesn't work well.
Yeah.
And that's what Foresight's trying to implement. I love the idea, because
I think it's great, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not sure, because of all the interdependencies, how you could really... that's going to be a little problematic. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I see it being problematic to really fully implement.
Well, in theory, what's the problem if it just logs everything that gets updated, and then, it logs the version you had before, and then logs everything that got updated, and then to downgrade, it deletes the new version, installs the old version, and there you go.
Well, because of the interdependencies in Linux, yes, you can just roll back like that, and they can do that. But what I'm referring to, there's going to be points at which you have to upgrade some stuff, and then some stuff will lead to other stuff upgrading. And that's where it's going to get hard, and it's one of those, the practicality limits of how useful that can actually be, in that, okay, I get my old system back, but then if I've got to the point where I have something that needs that, I just can't update ever, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of a rolling distro. What I would prefer to see added on top of this to address that problem is some type of sandboxing environment, that if you're in a position where you need to roll back, you can roll back and then do a sandbox style upgrade, in which you upgrade, but you run the upgrade in a sandbox so you can actually keep both. That is really, as problematic as this is, that's even more so.
Alright,
but unless there's anything else in here you want to go into, or...
seems like that's it.
Well, I mean, there's other stuff in here, but it'd be better if we had Jordan or other people, so I guess we'll tail off here a little short this week, but...
I'm sure people won't mind.
Yeah, it's like they're like, well, you mean y'all are actually gonna shut up? All right, peace out, all.